My name is Eric Mintel. By night, I'm a professional jazz musician, but by even later at night, I investigate the paranormal. I, along with my team at Bucks County Paranormal Investigations, travel the country investigating all things paranormal. This is Bucks County Paranormal Investigations. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It's Eric Mintel, accompanied by the one and only Bill Burns here at Bucks County Paranormal Investigations. Last week, we interviewed Kathleen Marden in part one of the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience, and her book, Captured, is unbelievable. Betty and Barney Hill UFO abduction experience is the first documented UFO abduction experience ever. And this is an incredible book. We are so happy that Kathy's with us today. And we've got a lot more questions. I know we only got like 30 minutes in last time, so we had like another 30 years worth of questions to go. But Kathy, thank you so much. From Florida today, right?
Yes.
Again.
Good to be back.
And so thank you for coming here. And I know, Bill, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you had a couple of questions to start off with, but and I have some other questions as well.
I think it was probably maybe almost 20 years ago, 18 years ago, when I last interviewed Betty. And one of the things that always interested me was the time frame of that event, because this event came really just as the civil rights movement obviously was in the start of the 1950s, but as it reached the 1960s, there was a fever pitch. I mean, it wasn't just a protest anymore. The people in the South, who were the segregationists, knew that history was not on their side. And they knew that there was going to have to be a reshaping of American society. That you couldn't have a society circa 1945 in 1960-61. And there was all this violence in the South. There was Birmingham and Selma, the Pettus Bridge, all the people who were now icons of the civil rights movement, they were the victims. And it's at that point in 1961 when Betty and Barney decided to go on vacation in Canada. And I was wondering how that affected your aunt and uncle.
Well, first of all, I want to say that Dr. Simon asked both Betty and Barney why they went on vacation to Canada. Well, Niagara Falls first. And the statements made were that Betty had a week's vacation from her job as a social worker for the state of New Hampshire. Now she was just going to stay home. But Barney decided to surprise her with a short vacation to Niagara Falls. I believe that the reason for that was that my aunt, who was Betty's sister, my uncle and I, and my cousin went to Niagara Falls on vacation about a month or so before that. And we were showing our photographs from the trip and talking about what a wonderful time we had. And Betty said to Barney that she had never been to Niagara Falls. She would like to go. And so Barney decided to surprise her by taking a few days off from work to take her to Niagara Falls. So this was kind of a spur of the moment trip.
Oh, okay.
So just pretty much as like a spur of the moment kind of trip.
Yes.
No, they were most likely, they knew they were stellar, parts of their community. They were just incredible people and pillars of the community. And Barney probably just wanted to get away from it all and take a little vacation. So I could definitely see that as well. And then fast forwarding now to the vacation, coming home, and just for our viewers, we mentioned it before, but I'll just mention it again. Betty and Barney were on their way back to Portsmouth, New Hampshire, where they called home. And Betty was looking at the moon and all of a sudden had seen a small light in the sky, which began to get bigger and was kind of zigzagging. Well, long story short, the UFO. It was turned out to be a UFO, and you'll see that in episode 1 where we talked about Kathy talked about it. We left off where Betty and Barney were basically controlled off the road by a series of beeps that they had heard coming from the UFO. So take us from that point where they were basically taken from the car. And I know people know this story, but to hear it from you is just, it gives it just that 100% authenticity, because you were there and you were the first one really that Betty told the story to.
My mother.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I would just, maybe take us from that point.
Okay, well, I think that I told you last week that they found themselves on a road that was unfamiliar to them. They didn't know how they arrived there. There were tall trees all around, and there was a light in the distance, a red glow. They turned to each other and started a conversation. What do you think's going on? You think there's an accident ahead? Are we being robbed? Barney had a gun on the seat next to him. And then these non-human entities started to approach the car. And Barney said, "It's them. It's the ones I saw when I was standing in the field." And Betty became terrified. She tried to escape and run into the woods, but they intercepted her as she was about to open her car door. And they took her out. Barney decided that he was not going to fight. He just opened the car door, stepped out, and then he felt as if his arms were extended in front of him and that only the toes of his shoes were bumping along the rocks. This is how his shoes became so deeply scraped that he had to buy new shoes. He said that he felt as if he were floating rather than being dragged. And then he could feel his shoes slide up a ramp and bump at the top of the ramp. He was taken onto the craft and into an examining room and put on a table. Betty did not want to go on that craft. She had become unconscious, but she regained consciousness before they decided to take her on, and she fought for her life. She kicked the small one who was next to her, holding on to her, and this is how the hem on her dress was torn down and the lining was torn from waist to hemline. They regained control of her and took her onto the craft and into a separate examining room. Her hypnosis with Dr. Simon on this event was first, so I'm going to talk about what she said. She was first put into what was similar to a dentist's chair, but only different. But it was sort of, lying back a little bit. And they started to examine her. There were 2 in the room, one that she called the examiner and the other one that she called the leader. There was also a small one standing in the doorway in the hall, sort of as a guard. And she was terrified of him, but not as terrified as the other two.
Did he look menacing looking to her, would you say?
The one standing in the doorway.
Yeah.
Yes. He's the one that we think of as the guard. He's the one who won't let you get off the ship with something that belongs to them. And so here she is sitting in this chair, and they are examining her hands, her feet, moving her fingers, her joints. They're very interested in her skeletal structure and her muscular structure. They look into her mouth, into her eyes, her ears. They take hair samples. They scrape her skin and take samples of that. And then they put her on a table. Before they do this, they decide that they're going to remove her dress. But apparently they don't know how to operate a zipper, because what happens is they tear the fabric at the top of the zipper and the stitching. And then the dress falls onto the floor. Her underwear remains on her body. She is placed onto a table. The physician, the examiner is down by her feet. The leader is up by her head. He's the primary communicator. The examiner then brings out something that looks like a needle. And this is after she's had neurological testing. But he brings out this very large needle, and she says, "What are you going to do with that?" And she gets the telepathic message where she understands, well, it's only a simple test and it won't hurt. We're just going to put it into your navel. And she says, "It will hurt, don't do it." But he ignores her, and he inserts this needle into her navel, causing great distress and pain. But almost immediately, the one standing by her head removes the pain by doing something up near the top of her head. This happens over and over again to abductees. Betty was the first who had this done, as far as we know, but I've heard this story probably hundreds of times.
It's like they touch the forehead and then the pain goes away.
There's something they do up here, and all the pain goes away. Fear goes away, too. So anyway, Betty's procedure is completed, and there's only one examiner on the craft, and he leaves the room and goes into the room that Barney is in. So for Barney's examination, he is lying on a table, and there have been other entities in the room with him while Betty was being examined. He's decided that he's just going to lie quietly and keep his eyes closed most of the time. He thinks that this will keep him safe, and he has less chance of being harmed if he is very passive. So then the examiner comes into his room and does the exact same procedure on him that he does on Betty. Examines his skeletal system, his muscles, takes off his shoes, looks at his feet, looks at his hands, opens his mouth. He can feel what feels like a finger entering his mouth. He can feel what seems to be a finger or a stylus or something moving along the vertebrae in his back. And at the end, they place a cup-like device over his groin and take a sperm sample from him.
Now they never put the needle in Barney's
They did not
navel.
put a needle in Barney's navel. No. We believe that was to extract ova from Betty.
Almost like what we were talking about, like the amniocentesis.
It actually is amniocentesis. That's what it
That was
became.
before the term. Was that term even coined back in 1961?
Nobody even knew what it was
Right, exactly.
in 1961.
Yeah, exactly.
It was under development, but no one in the public knew about this.
That's
it wasn't
amazing.
being used in any medical facility back then.
Wow.
In fact, obstetricians were very careful about it because they didn't know how much damage that would do to the fetus or the embryo. So they had to refine the technique. But when Betty described it, people were saying impossible, couldn't be done. But years later, it was.
But it was done, yes. So something that is kind of hilarious that happened is that now Betty is in the examining room and she has lost her fear. And so she decides that she's going to start to speak with the leader. But as they begin their conversation, some of the other people on the craft come in, these are the non-humans, with Barney's dentures in their hand, and they start tugging at Betty's teeth, and they won't come out. And so Betty has to explain that sometimes on Earth people lose their teeth as a result of injuries or that their teeth are decayed and they have to have them pulled out. So they're back in the room with Barney, and Betty is looking around. She sees a book of sorts, which is, she describes to me in the year 2000 as having a very thin cover that looks like plastic. And when you open the page, it is also sort of like plastic, but very stiff. And it has symbols that seem to be embedded in this plastic. There are 5 rows of different types of symbols. And she thought this could be her evidence to prove that this experience was real. So she is planning to take it off the craft. The leader even tells her that, sure, she can have that. She's carrying it. And then she says, I know you're not from around here. Where are you from? And he produces what appears to be a 3-dimensional star map, about 2 feet by 3 feet. It's sort of there in front of her, almost like a screen or a holographic image. And or she's also said that it was almost like looking out a window into space. But there were stars of different sizes and different colors. And so she said to the leader, well, where are you on this map? And he said, where are you on this map? Do you know where you are? And she said, no, I don't. I don't know much about the universe, is what she stated. And so he said, if you don't know where you are, how can I tell you where I'm from? And then he put the map away. But I want to talk about the map a little bit. There were 2 stars in the foreground that were about the size of nickels, and they were connected by 6 solid lines, heavy black lines, that she was made to understand were trade routes. And then there were other stars on this map. There were 12, and 16 in all, but 12 connected by lines. And they were, none of them were as large as the 2 in the foreground. They were about the size of dots, or the size of a pinhead. Some of them were connected by solid lines, and some of them were connected by dotted lines. So then Betty and Barney had finished with their examinations. Barney was being taken off the craft, and they went to escort Betty out, and they noticed that she was holding on to this book. And the decision had been made that she could not keep the book. And she remained behind, arguing with the crew. You told me I could have it. It's my evidence. She was very angry. So they took Barney down without her. And finally, they took the book away from her. They wouldn't give it back to her. And then the leader escorted her down the path to the car. And when he was doing that, she was still angry. And he said, I'm sorry. The decision was made that it would be better for you not to remember this experience. Maybe you will remember it. But if you do, you and Barney won't remember it exactly the same way. And you will just confuse one another. And Betty was pretty much saying, I'll remember this if it's the last thing I ever do.
Right.
And she said to the leader, then, I'm just an average person, but there are people that you might be interested in speaking with. And she was thinking of scientists. And do you think you could come back if I can arrange for you to speak with them? And he said, well, maybe I can, but the decision is not mine to make. And so she then said, well, how will you find me if you can come back? And he said, we can always find those that we want to find.
Interesting.
And during that conversation, too, he was saying, I know that you were very frightened in the beginning, and we apologize for that. And no harm was meant, and now you can go on your way.
And so all of this talking was done telepathically. We should say that as well. This was not.
Yes.
They were not saying the words. They were saying it telepathically that Betty could understand.
Yes. All Betty and Barney stated, any sound that they heard was almost like a little mumbling sound, but they understood it telepathically in English.
Didn't it strike you, or doesn't it strike you, looking back at it now from almost 60 years, that the conversations, such as they were, that they were so anthropomorphic on that ship? I mean, that the ETs were dealing with Betty and Barney, I mean, not as not as jailers dealing with inmates, but they were dealing with them as, test subjects. But the conversation was actually civilized, which strikes me, that there was a real dialogue going on. And of course, Betty was never known not to speak up, first of all. But believe me, when somebody challenged her, we would cross paths with Betty, my wife Nancy, whom you met. We were doing a book tour. This would be around late 80s. And we'd see Betty on the book tour circuit. And she was very outspoken with the head she was carrying around.
Yes.
But the funny part to me is, as you describe it, this could be like any interaction among human beings, and yet they're not from here.
They were being kind to Betty and Barney. They had no intention of frightening them. They were always attempting to reassure them that they would not be harmed, that they would be released. There were just a few simple tests that they wanted to run. And we find that over and over again.
And a lot of abductions.
Grays treating people this way, that's what I specialize in. And I've spoken to well over 1,000 experiencers, and probably I've been saying that for about 8 years, so it's probably well over 2,000 by now. But anyway,
and I like how
always reassuring.
I like how the language has changed from abductees to experiencers, because it's an experience. I mean, that's something that is just obviously extraordinary. And I think it adds a little bit more credibility too, because, look at the bigger picture. Look at how many people are going through this. And Betty and Barney were the first, really widely publicized.
Well, one of the things that in the wake of this, after the magazine cover and after the story circulated, the thing that was always below the radar and not disclosed was the fact that there was physical trace evidence that corroborated everything Betty and Barney said, not just to mention the fact that she spoke to your mom, to you, the following morning. So this was not, I'm just concocting this. This was literally, she had conscious memories of this. But all the physical evidence, the car, that blew my mind. It was the car, because I've heard that before with the Val Johnson case out in the Dakotas, where to this very day, they cannot keep a charge on that car's battery. They put in a new battery and it's drained. And something very similar happened with Betty's and Barney's car.
Yes, it did. And there are other cases that MUFON has, such as the case of Tom and Matthew Reed. There was a magnetic field around the trunk of Matthew Reed's car after he had a contact experience. So,
and you have done so much research on your own, and then, ladies and gentlemen, we should say too that we're going to put your info up on the screen as well, because you actually have a map. It's basically every single stop that Betty and Barney took, that people can actually go and experience for themselves, of where they were, what happened. I think that is so cool to be able to do that. Now, doesn't the University of New Hampshire also have the Betty and Barney Hill, some things about the incident there?
Yes.
I think I read.
I took Betty's materials to the University of New Hampshire after her death and them to establish an archival collection.
That's great.
Of the Hill event.
Which we encourage people to go look at.
Now, do you have all the tapes from the regression sessions, or are there still tapes out there that are in Benjamin Simon's files that you don't have? I know that they were purchased, and I know that now probably Disney has the rights to them because of the ABC Movie of the Week. based on the no, because when Bryce Zabel and I were talking about
I
this,
have-
Bryce
I-
thought that the tapes were with ABC.
I have all of the contracts that Betty ever signed, and they're at UNH too. And there was no contract for the sale of the hypnosis tapes in any of her records.
We should mention
But-
too that the movie, if anybody gets a chance to look at this, it's a great movie. It's basically all about the incident. James Earl Jones and I think Estelle Parsons was in it as well.
Estelle Parsons played
and,
your aunt. Yeah.
and she played Betty Hill, and James Earl Jones played Barney.
Barney.
It's called The UFO Incident, 1975. Great movie. It traces everything from beginning to end. But they did a great job in that. I thought it was one of the great, and that was 1975. So you're looking at like 14 years after the incident. But we haven't seen another movie since then.
No, and that was, people have wanted to do it.
Right.
I mean, I know Bryce wanted to do it, but that movie was really, it really set the story out, and again, that's part of the whole modern age of taking true stories, personal stories, and making them into motion pictures and television series. I mean, there were a whole slew of those in the 70s.
We've got about a minute left and wanted to ask you, Kathy, where are you going to be next so people could see you and hear you?
Oh my gosh. Well, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be in Phoenix, Arizona, and I will be doing a training session for the Mutual UFO Network on the 3rd, I believe it is. And then on the 10th, I'm going to be doing a lecture for Phoenix MUFON.
Great. And we're going to put your website up on the screen so people could find you. And then I really just thank you so much for taking the time, and Bill for being here as well. I mean, you know, you guys, I've been following the story for years, and just to be able to talk to you in person here is just a real honor. So thank you so much for spending the time with us.
Thanks a lot, and
My pleasure.
I will see you on the Discovery Channel where we will meet again.
Oh,